Okay, so perfect. Um, Excellent. At this point, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can.
That
Excellent.
was
Okay.
me. Oh my goodness. I was in. Oh God, that's me.
Yep. If you talk, you're gonna go probably appear on the screen and it's recorded, so you'll forever be memorialized in these videos. Okay. So I have the chat window open. If for any reason you have a question while I go through the initial lecture, just go ahead and drop some text in there. Now let's see. I'm going to uh, jump over here, and that way I can still see the chat window there. Perfect. Okay. So welcome to CSCI 4208, Developing Advanced Web Applications. So the first thing I typically like to do when I start this class, this is now the third time I've taught this class. And the first time was spring of 2020, and that semester didn't quite go how I intended it to go. But as a result, I got a incredible set of labs that we'll be using throughout the semester. And the second time I taught it was spring of 2021, and I produced a ton of PowerPoint slides and created some really nice video lectures, I think. So this semester, we're going to do something slightly different. I want to try to invert the classroom. One of the feedback points I got from the prior two classes when I taught this was that there is a lot of information that needs to be known in order to build a web application, a full stack web application. And so I'm going to try to reuse the content that I've developed in the last two offerings of this class to try to better effectively teach you what you need to know so that you can build a web application on your own. So we'll get more into that in a moment. So this is a web applications class, and we'll learn about front end, back end, and essentially our database layers. I'm Ted Holmberg. I am an instructor inside of the computer science department. I'm also the industry liaison, and I communicate. One of my primary roles is to communicate with our partners, our industry partners, and find out what skill sets they would prefer for you all to have when you're ready to graduate and go into industry. And so one of the big skills that I constantly hear about is essentially web-based application skills. So this class is designed in a way to help train you so that you can get a job after you graduate. And that's one of my primary goals. So I'm going to teach this class in a very dissimilar way than most other classes that you've probably gone into. So instead of thinking of me as a typical instructor, one of the hats I try to wear over the course of the semester will be more like a project manager. So like a lead developer. And so the way we're going to grade our homeworks, the way that the projects will be graded, will be more in line with the way you would get feedback in industry. So I'm going to talk about that more as I start to cover the syllabus. Actually, let's jump through the syllabus really quick, get everything kind of mapped out. So I already introduced myself. I'm Ted Holmberg. I do have an office on campus. So if you are on campus, and if I'm on campus, you can hit up my office. It's Math 347. I have an office phone number, but this is by no means the preferred method of communicating. And chances are I won't answer it because of the amount of spam that comes on telephones now. I do have an email address. You are free to email me. However, my preferred method of communication throughout the semester will be the Discord server. And I am going to require that everyone joins the Discord server. The invite link is right here in the syllabus. The syllabus was both emailed to you and it was it should also be on side of Moodle as well. And I know that all of you have it because you're here in the lecture, right? That's the only way you can know about lectures if you have the syllabus. Okay, so we also are going to meet twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 2 to 3:15. However, your class will be the lucky recipients of an inverted lecture sequence. So if you look at the way that I'm doing my online delivery, I want to try to pivot this class to be more like an internet class where you can go at your own pace. And of course, I have the link to Moodle there. And so what that means is that the traditional lectures are going to already be recorded. Now, this never got fulfilled here. This 10 to 15 minute pre-recorded videos, no, they're more like an hour and 15 minutes. I should have corrected that. But what you'll see, if we go into the Moodle, okay. If I go into Moodle, which is going to be jam-packed with all sorts of goodies, and I'm going to kind of do an explanation about what all this stuff is. First of all, if you go into Moodle, mine might look slightly different because I'm on instructor view. You have the syllabus here. We will ignore labs for now. Starter files, submissions, homework, quizzes. Okay. Projects. Okay, since I want to try to set this up so that you have the opportunity to kind of learn at your own pace, I just unlocked everything at once. So when you look at them at Moodle, it can be quite shocking. But that's okay. Like, we have a full semester to grok over everything, and I want to spend today's lecture kind of giving you a tour of what's going on in the Moodle so you know how to best use it for this course. So what I have shared from last time is all of my lecture videos from the 2021 teaching this class. So each one of these lecture videos, so for instance, I have Web Dev Lecture 1. It was on February 2nd, and it covers concepts related to HTML. Lecture 2 would cover concepts related to CSS, browser tools, Bootstrap, JavaScript basics, JavaScript data structures. That's covered across 2 different lectures. I talk about the lab that was a platformer game, object-oriented JavaScript, all of the standard library stuff that's inside of the browser API, the document object model, events in JavaScript, talk a little bit about the final project, HTTP stuff. Okay, so you can see all of the lectures are here. One of the things that I kind of get disappointed about every semester is that we only get 3 hours a week to have face-to-face time and communicate, where you as a cohort can collectively ask me questions and we can have a dialogue. If I lecture in the traditional sense, typically that is the first exposure you have to the content, which means that you don't know it well enough to formulate a good dialogue with me. You don't know it well enough to formulate any questions or to communicate any issues you might have come across that can help you resolve. So it's almost like our 3 hours a week that we get together is me just talking to you about things. It's as if I'm a live action video. So this semester, I want to see if I can't invert that. I want to assign the lectures on the PowerPoint slides outside of the lecture hour so that we can spend our in-class hour doing the lab assignments. And so I think that will put us in a really good place because we can have a more give and take. We can actually practice what gets communicated about inside of the lectures during our 3 hours that we have between Tuesday and Thursday. And so the way that I break the course material down is, I'm not going to lie, like web applications relies on a lot of different technologies. And it's pretty difficult to go ahead and fit all of those technologies in the span of one semester, because you're trying to cram a lot in just 16 weeks. So we're going to go through from a foundational perspective. So I've wrestled with this personally on how best to do this, and I think this is the way that I've compromised the most. And I'll talk about what I mean by that when I hit my PowerPoint slides, for at least this initial lecture. Anyway, so the course delivery will be the lectures, which are available through Moodle, and they're available through Moodle. What was that section called? Right here. It's under the section that's called lecture videos. And if at any time you want the base PowerPoints that I'm using inside those lecture videos, it's going to be right underneath this section, which is called lecture PowerPoints. So feel free to go ahead and consume those lectures as quickly as you want, but in terms of slowly, make sure that you watch the lecture that talks big picture and goes over a lot of different concepts before we do the lab component inside of class. That way you'll be more familiar with what we're going to be doing, so that you can engage in a dialogue if there's anything that you might not understand. Okay, and so our lectures are then going to be very application based, where we will have live coding sessions. And this will be great, because what I had done before was the actual doing of things you used to have to do on your own, probably when it was best for me to be around to be able to resolve questions. So we'll be able to try to tackle that this semester. And then we will also have student hours and discussions. We'll use real-time chat. This is the thing that I love about Discord. And actually, let me just go ahead and copy this invite link. And I'll just put that into this message chat here. Oh no, that is nonsense. Let me just get the invite link. So here, full stack applications, invite people. Yeah, edit that link. Let's edit it so that it never expires. No limit on people. Generate, copy. Perfect. Okay, let's jump into here, and there we go. Okay, so everyone, please join the Discord. In fact, you'll have to when it comes time to get your assignments graded, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. I think they have one prereq, or the prereqs for the class. I'm assuming you fulfill the prereqs if you got enrolled in this class. Okay, a quick description about what we'll be covering. Will you assign a lecture or 2 video after every lecture? That's a good question. So, how am I going to assign the lectures? Well, I am already telling you right now that that we will be doing the first lab, the HTML lab, next lecture on Tuesday. And in fact, that is one of the few labs that I'm doing a full rewrite on. So please do not, well, you're free to do the lab that's posted on Moodle currently, but it's going to be a completely different lab that we're about to tackle. It's I'm doing the final edits on it now, so it'll probably get published later today or sometime early tomorrow. So, but I'll walk through the HTML lab on Tuesday, which means that I would like for everyone to have watched the first lecture video by Tuesday. And so to guarantee that everyone has a comprehension of what gets discussed, each lecture will have a companion quiz. So let me go back to the Moodle so you can see this. So if I go into, so the way the Moodle's organized is all of the graded stuff is at the top. So here I have the lab. So these are the lab documents. I'll make it available to you. Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay, so okay, so the first thing that we have inside of Moodle is going to be the labs, the homework, and the quizzes. So we'll skip by the labs. These are the things we will now be doing in class, and I'll show you the code, and I'll talk about the motivation on why I coded things that way, and then I'll give you samples of the code actually running, but then you'll actually have to do these labs as well. But this way you won't have to do these labs in isolation of not having me there while they're being applied. So all of the lab documents, although, like I said, this first lab I'm doing a current rewrite on. So if you want to start working on labs, you could do that one, but it will be different than the one you'll actually want to submit. Any starter files I'll have in here, but also post my starter files on GitHub. And then you will submit your all of your course material into Moodle so that I can apply grades, so that you can use the grade book inside of Moodle and see where your standings are at any given time. Okay, these will be the homework documents. I'm actually rewriting the first homework to merge homework 1 and homework 2 into one homework. So again, don't do that one yet. I will show you that. That's a good question. I'll show you how much the quizzes are worth. But I just wanted to show you where it was at. So you have the quizzes section here. And so after you're done watching the video, you can go and click on the quiz. You get an unlimited amount of attempts at the quiz, right? I just want to ensure that you understand the concepts that went over in the lecture. So there's no reason why everyone shouldn't be able to get 100% on these quizzes. And again, it's because I have a different motivation for the way that I'm trying to teach this material. Like there's two pedagogical approaches for testing, right? One is to ensure that you understand and the concepts that I think are mission critical for you to hit all the learning objectives that I've put forth. The other is to assess how much you've learned those things. I prefer the former over the latter. Okay, so let's see here. Yeah, I'll answer this question in just a moment. For each week, have the recorded lecture watched before we come here. Exactly, yeah. That's because I want to spend our lecture time for every other lecture besides this one actually doing in-person coding of the lab assignments. And then I'll be recording that as well. So then you'll have videos of me writing the labs and videos of me lecturing on the PowerPoint material. Okay. Excellent. Okay. But since I'm doing the inversion of the videos, I also have these quizzes just so that you can verify to yourself and verify to me that you understand the concepts that we'll be going through. Okay. So let me go back over here. Well, but I help with responsibility by having quizzes, right? So you'll feel responsible for having to take the quiz, and the content and the quiz will be covered in the PowerPoints and in the inside the videos. And the nice thing that I like personally about rewatching video lectures as opposed to real time is I can crank it up to 2x speed. So that way you can watch an hour and 15 minutes in half the time. Okay. So now let me go over just what we're going to be covering. So like I said, web application is pretty dense. And what I like about web applications is it pretty much takes everything that you've learned in all your other classes. So you take, like, for instance, you've taken software design 1, you've taken software design 2, you've taken data structures, you've taken system programming concepts, you've taken OS, you've taken databases, you've taken programming language structures, you've taken networking. Well, web applications uses concepts from all of those classes in order to build essentially a distributed application where a part of it runs inside of a web browser on the client side, a part of the application runs on some remote server, and another part of the application, the data persistence, is usually on some other data server. And so if we actually look at the technologies that are fitting together to build out your web application, you could think of the client side portion. So for us, our client side portion, we're going to be producing all of our applications inside of the browser. So our browser has a runtime environment, JavaScript runtime environment. Browsers are really designed to go ahead and render HTML pages or HTML documents. And they can also have a CSS parser that can apply styles to your HTML content or documents. Okay, so essentially you can break down the viewport, what's being displayed inside of the browser, as having a view, having a set of controllers, and having your underlying data model for what your web application is doing. So you're using that model view controller design pattern that you probably learned about in software design too. Then on the server side, we're going to be learning a full JavaScript web stack. So we'll be using JavaScript on the client side. We'll be using JavaScript on the server side as well. We'll be using Node, which is a runtime environment that we can run JavaScript code at the OS level. And so there are some frameworks and libraries that we can use built to run on Node. One is the Express framework that will make building a web server very easy for us. And then we will use MongoDB. Since you're already learning a SQL database in your database class, I've decided to use a non-SQL database inside this class just to expand your horizons so that you can have two different approaches for data persistence. And so effectively, the way that this is going to work is your web client and your web server communicate and share information between one another. And then your web server connects to a database to access any information it needs to then share with whatever web clients are requesting. And of course, web applications typically use like a request response model, but they could also use a like WebSockets, so a two-way model. We'll be learning both of those. So effectively, the various things we'll learn about over the course of the semester will be like the HTTP protocol, this multi-tier architecture. When I talk about multi-tier, we're talking about the fact that part of your application runs on the client, part will run on a server, and part of it will run on a different type of server, which is exclusively designed for data persistence. And if I were to lay these tiers one next to the other, you could see it kind of makes a stack of technologies. And so that's what we mean by full stack applications, is that a part of the stack is the client, a part of the stack is the server, and a part of the stack is the database. Well, if you haven't, what is a SQL database? So what I'm assuming you're still using the Oracle databases inside your database class. You also have Postgres as well. Now, I will say you don't have to have taken databases to take this class, and that's another reason for using Mongo. Everything you need for data persistence will cover. But if you've already taken databases, when we get towards the project, you're free to use whatever database technology that you want and you feel comfortable with. Okay, anyway, so this is just kind of a map of all the technologies we're effectively going to cover and how they're going to interrelate to one another. So in terms of resources, when I first started designing this class, I did a lot of research in trying to find a textbook, and there's just not any good textbooks for building full stack applications. And one reason why is JavaScript and its related frameworks move so fast in the current marketplace that by the time you publish a textbook, it would be out of date. You couldn't write it fast enough to keep up with the market. And so for that reason, it doesn't make sense to even look for a textbook. Not that there's a good one out there. What I prefer to use is the documentation, for the API documentations for all of these technologies that we'll be exploring. So for your front-end docs, Mozilla who deploy and maintain the Firefox browser, they have what's called MDN, the Mozilla Developer Network, and this is pretty standard across the field on where to go to look up browser-side API calls. So that will have any information you might need related to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, client-side JavaScript. I'll also go ahead and recommend that you go to W3 Schools. There's a lot of great tutorials on here, and they have tutorials that focus on any one of these technologies we'll be touching upon. So this is great supplemental information that you'll have access to. Now, in terms of our backend docs, we're going to be doing what's called a MERN stack. And so the MERN stack is talking about these 4 different technologies that all use JavaScript in some kind of interesting and novel way in support of deploying a web application. You have Node. Node is essentially just a runtime environment for JavaScript. So it allows you to run JavaScript outside of the browser. Before Node was a thing, the only place where you could run JavaScript code was inside of your browser. And so one reason why you can now have full stack web applications using JavaScript is because of Node. Then Express runs on top of Node. And so that has a lot of built-in functionality to be able to very quickly start up your own web server. Our web client will be a browser. So that's a piece of application that we'll commonly be using throughout the semester. So hopefully everyone has a browser installed. And then we have React, which will be a front end that will be used to render front end components. And then Mongo is for data persistence. So that's essentially your database layer. Okay, so what are the learning objectives? What do I want you to have learned by the time we have completed this course? Well, I intend for you to be pretty comfortable with all the foundational concepts that go into building web applications. And so I had wrestled whether I should even start at the foundational level or if I should just jump in and teach you React from the get-go. And I think foundations are important. I think front-end frameworks come and go. What was once popular was Angular, and that got replaced with React, and now you also have things like Vue. And in a couple of years, it could be something different. But they all go to solve the same problem. And if you know what it's doing in terms of a foundational understanding, then it's easy to switch between frameworks and libraries. So I'm actually going to start with HTML and CSS and JavaScript. And the reason why is I can understand where after teaching this class 2 times prior, I actually had a decent number. I'd say about half, if not more, of the class had never touched HTML or CSS before. So I just want to make sure everyone has a nice, strong foundation. So we'll start with the basics, HTML. And inside of HTML, I'll give all the kind of subcategories of what we'll be learning. So with HTML, you'll learn about elements and attributes and all the various types of inputs so that we can build HTML forms, and then how some of those attributes can be to define class names or ID names, and the fact that HTML is a type of markup language. And then we'll look into CSS, which allows us to apply styling to our HTML. And then again, in that lecture, we'll talk more about what are CSS selectors and properties and declarations and grid boxes and flex boxes. And then we'll talk about Bootstrap, which is a CSS library to create responsive web applications. And then we're going to get to JavaScript. So I don't want to spend too much time with this foundational stuff. It's important that everyone knows it, but then we'll jump into JavaScript. And inside JavaScript, you're going to get a crash course. As you saw in the lectures, we're going to start with basic JavaScript. Then we'll go into the various data structures available to you in JavaScript. And then we'll go ahead and look at object-oriented JavaScript. So effectively, we're going to cover what we did in Software Design 1 and 2 in the matter of maybe 3 or 4 lectures, so that you feel like you have a deep understanding of JavaScript, since that's what all of our front end and back end applications are going to be written in. And again, JavaScript is one of the best languages to know right now if you're actually looking to get a job. Okay, then we'll look at browser API stuff. So what is essentially the standard library available to us in the browser? And that'll be things like local storage, or what is the DOM or the document object model. Then we'll talk about what REST APIs are. And so just so you know, REST APIs are what allows us to essentially build. So if you think about an API, everyone should be familiar with an API in terms of what Java is. So every time you went to go use Java and there was something you didn't know how to use, you could go check the API and there's like a collection of methods, right, in various classes. Well, you could think of a REST API as a typical API that is a collection of methods, but it's one that can get invoked over HTTP. So it allows you to essentially host data available to the client side of an application through the internet. Then we'll take a look at React and how we can go ahead and use JavaScript to start building essentially HTML elements. And then we'll do a little bit of testing, how we can go ahead and debug the front end of our web applications. So this will be the first portion of our of this class. This will be Unit 1, the front end web applications, all client and stuff. Once we feel comfortable building applications that run in the browser, we'll pivot to Unit 2, which is going to focus on backend web applications. So here we're going to learn NPM, that's just our package manager for Node, to be able to install various packages. We'll install and start using Node, which is that OS level JavaScript runtime environment. We'll then start building projects with Express, so that'll handle our HTTP requests and responses, essentially be the back end of our web server. Then we'll start talking about various concepts that are going to be meaningful to us when we build a web application. Things like our user authorization authentication or password managing. So we'll use a package called Passport to help us with that. And then we won't just look at REST API from the client side, but we'll build our own REST API from the server side. And then we'll look at different ways to go ahead and test our server to make sure that we can go ahead and debug things. And then the third portion of this course will then be our data persistence side. So again, we'll have some lectures that go into MongoDB, which is document-based storage. And we'll talk about the general CRUD operations you might have, which is your create, read, update, and delete operations that you have on your database. Okay, so earlier I promised how much were those quizzes worth? Well, I'll do you one better. I'll tell you what everything's worth. So those proficiency quizzes, the ones that you have an unlimited number of times to take for a grade, is worth 20% of your grade. Now, it's my goal for you to have a proficiency quiz for after that follows up every PowerPoint presentation. So the PowerPoint presentation, depending on how long it is, might take 1 or 2 or 3 lecture videos, but the quizzes themselves are based off of my PowerPoint slides. So you can use the PowerPoint slides, you can use the lectures to prepare and take the quiz, or you can just take the quiz and see what the quiz is asking. Because again, it's not timed and you have an unlimited number of times. Now, I currently have the HTML, the CSS, and the Bootstrap quiz live. And as the semester continually progresses, I'll find more time to produce more quizzes. So from the first 3 quizzes, it looks like it takes me about a day to produce a quiz. So it's my goal to get about 2 or 3 quizzes a week live on Moodle as we continue to go forward. And again, I'm going to leave everything open so you can work at your own pace so that you can learn this as fast as you want or as slowly as we hit these concepts while we're covering them inside of the labs. So the labs, the things I'm actually going to be showing you how to do during our lecture time, is worth 25% of our grade. So I'm going to show you how to do the code, and then you're going to do the code on your own alongside me or alongside the videos, and that's worth 25%. So already almost half your grade is based off of content that there's no reason why you shouldn't get 100% on that. Okay, then the other approximate half of your grade is going to come from the homework assignments. So the way that the homework assignments are going to work is each lab kind of shows you how to apply the concepts that we're talking about in lecture. But then in order for you to show me you understood that and that you can actually do that, you have a homework that essentially is going to have you implement the things we did in lab. So I very much believe in learning by the three-way approach, where I talk about something in a very vast and conceptual way so that you have a lot of information to go on. But then I want to show you how to use those ideas, those concepts in a meaningful way. So that's the second prong of the way I think that we learn. So the first is to give you a full explanation that has a ton of context. And the second is to give you a more narrowed example of how that information is used to actually build a practical thing. But then the third is for you to show me that you understood both the concepts and the practice by building your own thing. And this is very much an apprenticeship style model of training. So I talk about things in a lecture style, which are now all recorded, and I show you how to do something where you have the ability to ask me questions and work alongside me. But then I'll assign a task where you get to actually build the thing on your own. And that's what the homework assignments are going to be. And the homework assignments, for every lab that we do, or for every new concept, maybe not every lab, but for every concept that we do, there should be a homework associated with it, just as proof to show me that you understand that concept. And then there will be one big final project, a capstone project, that's worth 30% of your grade. And so the final capstone project is not an individual project. It's a group project. You can group into groups of as large as 3. And that's something that you should be working on throughout the semester. I allowed a group larger than 3 last semester, allowed a group of 5, and it was the worst performing group of the lot, unfortunately. So I've learned that I think 3 is the magical number for good success. Now, if you want to work in pairs, that's also fine. I'm fine with that. Or if you want to work individually, I could make that work. So I'm open. Now, I will also say this: when you group up for your final project, try to find people that you will team up well with. So, feel free to go ahead and have a talk before you decide to become group partners. And again, the Discord channel will be or the Discord server will be a great place for you to cross communicate, ask questions, either for labs or homework or issues you're having, or to find your group partners. The final letter grades are, what you're probably used to. It's a 10-point system, right? So if you got a 90 or higher, you get an A. If you get an 80 or anything up to an 89, then that's a B. A 70, 79 is a C. Anything from a 69 to a 50 is a D, and anything under a 50 is an F. That's the same kind of grading rubric that we've used for the software design 1 and 2 classes. Excellent. So up to this point, are there any questions on the syllabus? Does everyone kind of feel comfortable with what this grading rubric is and how you're going to be issued a grade? Excellent. And again, my goal here is to try to bestow to you a set of skills that you can actually put on your resume that will help find you employment. And the other thing that my goal is for this class is to give you a repository of work, a body of work that you can also point to when you go to apply for a job and say, these are actual applications that I designed and implemented using these technologies. So there's going to be a lot more flexibility in the coding homeworks. There's going to be a lot more flexibility in the final projects because both of those things are going to be of your own design. So for the coding homeworks, no 2 people in this class should effectively have the same homework, because that would be super boring. That would be in terms of using it for portfolio work. And again, that's supposed to be one of the motivating factors behind the homework, is that it gives you an opportunity to actually design these web applications and build your own thing. So that when you go into a job interview, you could say, I designed this, I use these technologies, and it's actually live and deployed. You can hop onto it right now and see how it works. And I'll tell you what, when I go and talk to not only students who go in and apply for jobs, when I talk to a lot of these hiring managers, if you have portfolio work, you would be surprised how often the interviewer will just hop on and start looking at the work you had created. And that's a really good place for you in terms of an interview setup, because it allows you to control some of the technical questions that are going to be asked. So instead of having to randomly draw, what would you do in this scenario? If you can have them look at code you've done, then it's something you've already worked on and you know quite well. So you can explain concepts and kind of take the lead on that and from an interviewing perspective. So it's a good strategy, is what I'm saying, to try to go into an interview where you can maneuver it in a way to talk about code you've worked on. Okay. So now let's jump back over here. And okay, so there we go. We talked about the syllabus, my course philosophy, syllabus. Yep, use the syllabus for that section, course philosophy. Okay, so we talked a lot about 4208 when I was talking about the syllabus, and I talked about a lot of the learning objectives. But let me abstract away from that and highlight the fact that every course you take is opinionated, right? The instructor is the one who creates the roadmap and defines what the learning objectives are. So almost any course you take into, but especially with web applications, it's so vast, it's impossible to cover everything in just 16 weeks. So I'm doing my best, and you're going to learn based off of what I think is valuable. And so again, another goal that I have is to try to keep this as frustration-free as possible, but it's still going to be a crash course in full stack app development. So we're going to cover a lot of content, but I'm going to give you a lot of content so that we can do that, to try to make the learning process as easy and as painless as possible. Okay, so when I say opinionated, it's exactly as I described. There are many ways to do the things on the web, and you can't learn them all at once, especially in just 16 weeks, especially when you're taking other classes, right? So we're going to cover the things that I think you need to know that will be persistent and consistent inside of the field, and go all the way up until we touch technologies that will help you find a job. What do I mean by frustration-free? Well, we're going to slowly go through essential concepts like HTML and CSS, and then all the rudimentary client-side JavaScript. So we'll learn how to use JavaScript just to build out applications, and then we'll use the document object model, and then we'll talk about events, and then we'll talk about asynchronous JavaScript, so we can start making REST API calls, and then we'll start going to the back end and looking at how to build our own web server, and then using a framework to build a web server. So we're going to take a staged approach. We're not just going to drop you in with a lot of code in frameworks. I don't believe in magic frameworks. I don't like starting you off where I just overwhelm you with a lot of stuff. I like trying to lay down a foundation and building on top of that, something that's rudimentary, simple, and safe, and then building a layer on top of that, and building a layer on top of that, and then building complexity iteratively. So I take a very iterative approach with the way I try to teach. Yeah, this is computer science. It's not magic. Okay, so the goals. So my primary goal is to essentially say, and so if you never take another web programming class again, I want you to leave with the following capabilities: to be able to create attractive, responsive, full stack web applications that work on any type of device that has a browser, have the vocabulary and background knowledge to understand any kind of technical writing or discussions about web, So that will allow you to go and read any kind of web API documentation, kind of be able to understand principally what that API, what the value of that API is doing in servicing a web application, or to be able to perform well in job interviews, or to be able to even write random blog posts of your own, and also to have the foundation so that you can further pursue any area of full stack web programming that you might be interested in. So I want to give you a foundation so that things that we might not be able to cover in this class or cover in great enough detail, you will be equipped to have the confidence and the understanding to pursue that on your own after this class is done. That you don't just stagnate and stop learning after you're done the 16-week boot camp, essentially. Well, yeah, I mean, you should be able to get a job with the skills you're going to learn in this class. So this is the other thing that I can't stress enough. It's so important that you learn and understand the material. Put a lot of work designing PowerPoint slides and designing and recording lectures and producing labs and producing quizzes for the benefit of you learning skills. And one of the easiest things that you can lose sight of as a student, I know I've been there myself, is the grade that you get at the end of a class. But unfortunately, the way that academia has been set up, we're required to give you a grade. But the purpose of a class is never the grade. The purpose of a class should always be the learning objectives. When you're going through studying for a test, doing your homework, doing lab work, and when you're feeling frustrated on whether you know something or not, I would have you reflect on the course syllabus and go back and view the learning objectives and say, do I feel confident knowing this set of bullet points? Because that's when you pay a lot of money to take these classes. And what you're supposed to get out of that is a set of knowledges contingent on what those learning objectives are. And so if you find shortcuts that allow you to complete a lab or a quiz, but it doesn't, so such that you get a good grade, but you're not learning the material, then you're really just cheating yourself from why you're taking that class. Okay. Anyway, going back to I went off on a tangent, but okay. So what is this class not? This class is not going to be able to turn you into a senior front end, back end developer, right? That takes years. You can't do that in just weeks. No class will be able to make you an expert in something, but it can give you the foundations you need to be more like a junior level developer. So don't get too frustrated if you feel overwhelmed. Understand this is a lot of material, and it will take a lot of time to be able to perform well and to build these applications. But you also have to make the commitment right now. And so I want to say this early. You have to make a commitment to be able to put a lot of time into this class, since we are going to be touching a lot of technologies. So understand you're getting yourself into a class where there's a lot of learning to be had. So it's like the first day of lectures. So I want you to understand that's where we're at. And then what is this class not? Will not teach you all there is to know about web programming, because that's just impossible to do in 16 years. And there's some stuff that's not even worth learning about. Like, is it worth learning how to support old browsers and legacy devices and that kind of stuff? That's better to learn, I think, in industry and whatnot. It's not worth academic lecture time for any of those kinds of concepts. Okay, this is still relatively a newer offering, right? And there's not like, one of the advantages of having a textbook is that a textbook was designed by an instructor to be able to break material down across 16 weeks and be able to have it well explained and be able to kind of walk through it. But again, this is a material that changes so rapidly that I'm constantly rewriting things. Like, again, the first lab that I had issued for last class, I'm completely writing this semester. So because of that, everything is still subject to change. And I can't ever see that not being the case for this class, simply because the technology also changes, and I want the technologies you learn to be relevant. So don't necessarily rely on what's even inside of Moodle in its present state until I say it's okay. So you're welcome to do anything in Moodle, but I always reserve the right to change things, including things I've already talked about today. And again, since I'm rewriting this content each semester, there are possibilities where there's bugs or syntax errors or typos inside the homework, or there might be like awkward points in the lecture, especially if we are doing live coding, right? And I think I have a good grok on how to scope things, but you know, if there's something that's too hard or too easy, we will learn as we continually approach this. So that's just some caveats for you that about the realities of designing coursework. Okay, so the honor code, I guess this kind of ties into what I was kind of talking about earlier. Don't blindly copy other people's solutions or labs or anything like that. Like, it behooves you to actually go through, step through and type out the code, design your own applications for the homework, and just be a part of everything such that you understand everything. It's okay to look at other websites' code for inspiration. It's okay to look at Stack Overflow, Google, anything else. It's okay to share a web page you made and show off to others, right? Like, I want to encourage sharing. Like, in industry, it's not trade secrets, right? You're actively talking to other people, but the thing about it is, don't do it blindly, and don't just crib other people's work, right? Like, it's all right to look at other solutions, but you know, code it in your own way and understand what you're coding, because at the end of the day, you're looking to build a skill set that you can find deployment on. And if you don't learn that skill set, then you're only going to cheat yourself in the long run. You'll find yourself to have a grade in the class, but not be employable. And that's the opposite of what you want. Okay, so we already talked about the general concept of a web application, where on the client side, it runs in a browser. And then on the, you'll have some kind of browser-based REST API that's accessed through the internet. And so this is going to be hosted on some kind of web server right here. And so the intercommunication between the client and the server is going to use a protocol that we'll call HTTP, which is a request response model. So like, a client sends a request to the API sends back a response. Then the web server will then have reference to a database, and usually the database is hosted on some other remote web server. Okay, let's see here. We already talked about the overview here, and okay, yeah, Unit 1, and the rest of this is actually going to be in the first lecture. So I don't want to spend too much time in today's lecture because I'm going to assign that. So let me show you, let me go back to Moodle now. So I'm done with these slides. I'm going to go to Moodle, make sure everyone has a good grasp of what's happening in Moodle, because again, there's a lot of data. So Moodle, so the first section of Moodle will have all of the graded stuff. So I wanted that to be first and forefront. And everything for this semester is made available to you already. So you can start reading through these documents. As the documents are now, these are the documents that I used from last semester. And if for any reason you have any issues, again, we will be going through the lab documents in our lecture hours over the course of the semester. So I'll actually go through all of the goals and explain all the motivation and actually demo out all the code over the course of the semester and record that and make that available. So if you have any questions, go ahead and send those questions to me and ask me in the Discord. There's no need to hit up Stack Overflow or Course Hero or any of those other more shisty sites that are filled with, I don't know, whoever might answer questions. I prefer to be able to answer whatever questions you might have. That's one reason why you're taking the class from me and not from Udemy or something. Okay, so these are the lab documents. Then underneath the lab documents would be the whatever starter files that the labs actually require. So those will be available to you through Moodle. So again, this is going to change because I have new starter files for the lab I rewrote. Now, all of the lab starter files will also be available on GitHub. So you can either use Moodle or GitHub to get whatever assets are required. And then finally, there will be a submission category. Now, one thing I haven't updated yet are any of the dates. So I will use Moodle throughout the semester to make announcements when the homeworks and when the quizzes and when the labs are due. So those announcements on Moodle are typically sent via email to your email address. So it's super critical that you check your email all throughout the semester. And again, if you have any questions, ask me on Discord. I'm holding all of my office hours through Discord. And one thing I like about Discord is it's a persistent chat. And I'll show you Discord again, the Discord server again. But it's also something that's available 24/7. So at any time, you can go ahead and ask me a question at my earliest convenience. I can go and answer it. Or if it's something that any of you already know, you can answer it. I can kind of crowdsource this. So anyone else in the class can help answer these questions. Or maybe someone in the class had a question that you also had. So you get to see the answer to everyone else's questions. But not just that, everyone else who's ever taken this class is also in this Discord. So you have the advantage of being able to get answers from all the former UNO students in this class. And some of these have been employed now. So you might even have the opportunity to ask them questions about what it's like to be in industry. I know at least 1 or 2 people are now working over at Amazon or Google or a couple of other places. Okay, so this is the lab submission area. And so these lab submissions, I need to update the way that the grade book is set up in terms of the percentages, but my goal is so that you can just go to the grade book and see what grades you have completed and how it all builds out so you can use Moodle the way it's supposed to be used. Then the homework documents are here. And again, because I rewrote homework 1, I'm rewriting homework, since I'm rewriting lab 1, I'm also going to retool homework 1 and homework 2 to effectively be the same thing, but it's going to merge them together. So instead of having one homework on HTML and CSS, it'll just be the one homework that's combined. That makes the most sense. So these are the homework documents. And again, I'm likely to add more homeworks for this semester than I had the prior semester because I've put some more thought into what I kind of want this class to be. And I always do a postmortem at the end of each semester to see how I can improve it. So again, I'll make announcements as I add things in there, but this just gives you the opportunity to kind of preview everything. And then the homework submissions would be here. And then all the quizzes will just be Moodle quizzes. So again, I'll put the dates in here, but once these quizzes become available, there's no reason why you can't just start taking them. So you don't have to wait for us to hit a concept before you take the quiz, right? You can watch all the videos from the prior lecture and burn through them as quickly as possible so you can start working on your final project. And effectively, once you have your final project done, you can keep like iterating, adding features on it, or when you're happy with it, you can be done with the content of the class. So it kind of behooves you to work through this as quickly as possible because then you can do the fun part, in my opinion, build the best project ever. And anyway, as long as you hit whatever your criteria are and you hit all the learning objectives in the class, then you're effectively done. So this should be interesting to me to see if how fast some people are willing to work through the content. And then the final project is broken down into a couple different parts. In fact, let me see here. So let me go through the project rubric so you can kind of see how it's graded. So the project rubric is going to be graded to 9 parts. And the reason why is for something that's worth 30% of your grade, it's nice for it to have be discretized across multiple layers. So 5% of your final project will be based off of a proposal where you declare your team members, you propose a basic idea, and you give some kind of abstract. Then 10% of your final project will be in planning and specification document where you identify all your user stories, you detail all the features, such as what's going to happen on the back end, what's going to happen on the front end, and what kind of data is going to have to be stored. 10% of your final project will be a front-end design document where you do just mock-ups, interactions, where you kind of plan out on paper what your application looks like before you start implementing it. 10% will come from some back-end design document, and 10% will come from the data design document. So a decent percentage of your project is based off of just design work before you even have to start coding anything. And then once you lay this design document stuff out, you can use that to actually go ahead and actually start implementing each portion of your application. So I will do audits with you. And so this brings me into an explanation of how you get grades. I mentioned previously that this class is probably going to be graded atypical from any other college level course that you've been in. So let me talk about how grading will work as well. Since I don't do assessment grading, and what I mean by that is I'm not like giving you a ton of information, then I'm determining what percentage of aptitude you had by giving you a test and saying, oh, you were able to get 80% of the questions right on the test. So that's like having a B's worth of comprehension on it. I will have due dates on all the assignments, but you don't get a grade simply by turning in an assignment. The way that it works in the professional world is typically you do like a stand-up. So your lead developer will assign a junior level developer, and you can think of all yourselves as junior level developers, will assign the junior level developer a task or an application or some kind of milestone that has to be hit. And then you go and you implement that. And then when it's done, you go and show that code off or talk about you could do a stand-up, you could talk about how you implemented that code. And so that's what we're going to do. Every grade that you get is going to be based off of what we're going to call an audit process. So after you turn in an assignment, you will schedule with me like a small 5 or 10 minute audit where we'll do a Zoom meeting, and I will let you share your screen where you get to launch the application and show me what you built. And you get to tell me what the goal was, what problem it solves, what the purpose of that application is. And then after showing it off, then we can delve in and look at the source code to see how you built it. And I'll likely have questions about, well, why did you do this? Or how did you go ahead and do this? And then you'll be able to go ahead and answer those questions to me. So one of the big important values that I see about having homeworks and projects, especially in academia, is to use them not only to build practical things, but to get feedback about whether you built something well or not. And so I can tell you if it's built well or not, but I can't do that effectively, or I've learned I can't do that effectively by just having you turn it in and then me giving you a grade on it, because the grade isn't a good feedback mechanism. Now, I'll also say that usually when I go through the audit process, I'll tell you whether I'm satisfied or not with your application. If I'm not satisfied with your application, I will allow you to continue to work on it, but you will not get a grade. And that's where this is an atypical grading. You can't just show an application off, or I feel uncomfortable being in a position where you show off an application, and if it doesn't meet my standards, me just giving a C or D. I don't like that as a concept for you to learn things, because I don't think you learned what I wanted you to learn. So what I'll tell you is I'll give you my criticisms, and I'll say, I think it would work better if you did this, with the expectation that you go back and you correct the software so that it meets whatever expectations I have. And then I'll give you typically the full points for the application. Does that make sense in terms of my my pedagogical approach? Excellent. So it's important to understand, be prepared to request audits, which is going to be just a 5 or 10 minute demo where you'll show off what you built, and then we'll hit the source code and we'll kind of look at it. Because that's how so all of the labs you don't have to do demos on, because I wrote the labs. So I understand all of the motivations behind that. So when it comes time to do the demos, think about what I'm going to be doing for you when I'm doing the labs, where I'm going through implementing them in real time. Although you're not going to be implementing in real time. You'll just be showing off in real time and kind of explaining what the motivations were for some of this. You could use what I'm doing as kind of a measure of what you'll have to do for me for these project audits. But what I really like about these project audits is it also forces you in a position to talk about your code in a verbal way. And so again, I've really designed this course based off of a lot of the recommendations that I hear from industry folk and hiring managers. And one of the biggest deficiencies they constantly tell me they would like us to try to address in academia is not just it's the soft skills, the ability for students or graduates or software developers or junior level software developers to be able to talk in team-based settings and to be able to talk in team-based settings to a wide array of different personalities. So think about as a developer, you have to talk at a technical level, like to your lead developer, to coworkers at a very technical level about your application. You have to talk to your client at a non-technical level where you're talking about it in terms of features or what value it gives to them in a user story kind of way. So like where you might talk about the implementation of a feature to your manager, you might have to talk about the value of that feature in terms of what it does for the client. And then to a manager who is not a software developer, typically you have to talk about your application in terms of how valuable it is in terms of your time. Like it's worth spending 3 weeks to develop this feature because it gives this kind of value to the application. So these are the 3 different kinds of stakeholders you typically have in the professional world. People who view your time and an application as something that is cool functionality, that's technically implemented and costs money. And so these audits kind of give you that ability to do that early on to kind of get a feel for that. Not just that, the team-based final project will also give you those opportunities. Okay, so let me go back to the Moodle. Yeah, then after all of the grading stuff, then I have the lecture videos, which you're free to watch. And as these videos become available, I'll also publish those into Moodle, but in a different category. We have the lecture PowerPoints, which are available to you. And then after that, I produce auxiliary resources that I think if for any reason my explanation does not make sense or does not go deep enough, I found lots of resources available online that I decided to share with you so that you can further investigate these things. So for instance, if you want to learn more about like front-end design stuff or being able to host pages on GitHub pages, or if you want to look at a roadmap on what it means to kind of like become a master in front-end design, then I have all of this content available to you. And then very more highly focused is a section just on like places you can go to learn more about HTML or learn more about CSS or learn more about Bootstrap or learn more about JavaScript basics or learn more about the document object model or manipulating the DOM or more about asynchronous JavaScript or more about React.js or more about, and again, a roadmap for learning the back end. So then we talk about the background stuff and then learning about things like Express, things like Node, Mongo, essentially a user authentication. So effectively, besides the documentation that I offer to you in the syllabus, besides the PowerPoint slides that I made, besides the lecture that I made, and besides the labs I made, I also have accrued a collection of content that I want to share with you so that at any time, if you're feeling kind of stuck, or if you want to learn more, you can go and explore these things. And I highly advocate that you do. You go check some of these things out to deepen your knowledge on these technologies. And if you find something cool that is not part of here, feel free to share it with me. I can add it into the Moodle as well. Now, the other big thing that I want everyone to be a part of or to be aware of is going to be the Discord. Everyone has to join the Discord. That is a requirement. And so here I have pancakes because it's a stack of pancakes, full stack applications. So here, all questions And you can see we have a large, we have 17 people online, people who aren't like 91. We have over 100 people who are part of this Discord who can help answer questions, and now some who are in industry. For homework assignments, usually I give a bonus option where if you build something that is awesome, that is beyond the call of what I asked, something that looks like a professional application, you can get a showcase bonus. But to be eligible for the showcase bonus, you have to deploy it and post a hyperlink to it inside this section. And then I'll evaluate and decide, and give a showcase bonus value to it. When it comes time to request an audit, you can see that process happens in this channel here. So when you start doing homeworks and you want to get an actual grade for your homework or for your projects, your final projects, this is the channel you'll use to request an audit. So you can see what my time available to you is. And you see it from last semester here. If you want to start finding a team, here I have a channel for you. You can start that today if you want to. But, I would also advocate that you're kind of picky about who you pick team. Like, it's all right to have a conversation, kind of like have an interview process for your team members. And then I'll let you know when like the first proposals due. So it's not we have a couple of weeks before you actually have to start to getting yourself into a team. I also have all the video lectures posted inside here as well, so that you don't necessarily have to go to Moodle to get access to it. It's also here. And the last thing that I want to share with you before I go ahead and call the first lecture is I want everyone to kind of get an understanding of what these final projects kind of look like. So since everything's been online, you're really reaping the advantage of that, because what I've accumulated over the course of the last times I taught this, I also recorded the final project demonstration. So the final project culminates into you demoing your project to the rest of the class. So each team will demo. So if you've ever done Game Dev 2 before or Game Dev 1, it's a similar measure as that. It's where you kind of show off what you built, so everyone else has the advantage of seeing that. I will share with you now inside of the Discord what the I'll share with this. I'll share with you this in a moment. It's not letting me share right now, but I will share with inside the Discord general server last semester's teams doing their demos of their final project, so that you can get an understanding of what you will have built by the end of the semester. And in fact, I have higher expectations of this semester's class than all prior ones. So I'm hoping that your applications are going to be even better than the ones that got developed a year ago. Excellent. Is there any questions that you have after the first lecture today? Yeah, I can't believe I fit all that in an hour and 15 minutes, and I kind of just like talked off the cuff, really. Yeah, it is a lot, though. I will say it is a lot.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, everyone, have a great day. Your first task is going to be to go watch the video 1, so that everyone's prepared for our HTML lab that we're going to do on Tuesday. And
video
please,
1, and do we have to do also quiz 1 or not yet?
Yes. Do video 1 and quiz 1. I'll update the due date on that today. So I'll do that after our lecture today. I'll update the grades for the first 3 quizzes.
Okay.
And will
Sounds
you
good.
put due dates as well?
Yes, I'm going to update the due dates on those quizzes.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll make announcements as I update the due dates. I will make announcements on Moodle, so you'll know what gets updated and not. So there's a record there. So I will only hold you accountable for what I am recorded as giving as a due date. Does that make sense? That is my contract with you.
Okay, thank you. See you next Tuesday.
Excellent. See you all next Tuesday. Please join the Discord, and please, actually, it's not required, but check out the demo so you could kind of get an understanding of the scoping that some of the other teams had done in the prior offering of this class. But again, I'm thinking bigger this semester. All right, bye.